Now, we're going to take a moment to reflect on the previous poll and introduce a second question for you all. So let's have a moment and revisit that first question we asked. What do you think is the best way to be an ally to Black female entrepreneurs? It looks like we're still at the 54%, which is more than 50% of taking a step beyond mentorship and be a sponsor. And that really aligns with what we just heard from our panelists in this first panel discussion. Now for our second poll question, so get ready to go ahead and make your selection and submit that. When women are finally given a chance to prove themselves in a senior position, they are handed something that is already broken and where the chances of failure are high. This is known as the glass cliff. What level of leadership have you seen this happen in before? The C-suite, the vice president leadership, the managerial role, or an entry-level position? So go ahead and start submitting in your answers and we'll get a preliminary look at those results. All right. And please continue to submit any questions for us through the Q&A instead of the chat as well. This is just a reminder before our next poll. Let's have a look at the preliminary results for this one. All right. It looks like 53% have seen this phenomenon of a glass cliff at the vice president leadership position. We'll revisit this again as people continue to submit their answers. For our next panel, we have, I want to share some data with you all before we move into it. According to data from Lean in 2020, when looking at the total workforce in the US, Black women account for 7% of the population, but they make up 12% of minimum wage earners. Of the C-suite leaders today, 21% are women and just 1% are Black women. All of this is despite the fact that 75% of Black women view themselves as very ambitious towards their career, with 40% hoping to make it to a management position within the next 5 years. This is according to CNBC and SurveyMonkey's Women at, this is a poll for CNBC and SurveyMonkey Women at Work survey that was released last year. This means that regardless of a Black woman's desire to advance in her career, there are seemingly insurmountable barriers ahead of her that make it harder to reach the top. So our next panel will address leadership, growth, and upward mobility for Black women. LJ Lewis is Vice President of Global Talent Acquisition, Inclusion, and Diversity at WeWork. After joining the company in 2019, she designed the company's global inclusion and diversity strategy centered on 4 pillars: talent attraction, engagement, development, and advancement. In her role, LJ leads talent acquisition, executive recruiting, employer branding, and campus recruiting, as well as WeWork's Office of Inclusion, which manages the company's Global Leadership Diversity Council and 5 employee affinity networks. LJ received a master's degree in human resources at New York University. She earned a bachelor's degree in business administration with a dual concentration in finance and management at Georgetown University. Trina Scott is Chief Diversity Officer for Rocket Companies, the nation's largest mortgage lender. In this role, Trina develops the strategy and infrastructure that fosters a culture of equity and inclusion, leveraging the diverse perspectives of her team members. She's passionate about people and creating a work environment that is grounded in collaboration and freedom of self-expression. She also connects Rocket Mortgage and the entire Rock family of companies to its local communities by helping attract, engage, and develop top talent. Trina joined the Rock family of companies to lead the diversity and inclusion team in early 2017. She has spent her previous 10 years with a public accounting firm that focused on the company's corporate social responsibility efforts. While she was there, she launched a youth mentorship program centered around college access in 30 plus US urban cities. This helped more than 1,000 young people get accepted to college. Welcome, LJ and Trina. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for joining. So excited to speak with you. And we've got Trina. Hello.
Hi, good to see you. And man, it's such an honor to follow Ayana and Tamika, and just really excited to be here. Thank you to Ebby Parsons, my friend from Detroit. What up, though? And to all of the people that are here. I wouldn't greet you right if I didn't say that. So I'm sure Ebby is smiling right now.
That too. He just wrote you in the chat, of course. Well, I'm honored to speak with both of you, and I really want to just start diving in because there's always so much content to cover. So, LJ, maybe you can give us a little bit of input and insight on your role as VP of Global Talent Acquisition, Inclusion, and Diversity at WeWork, and how you ended up reaching this position.
Sure, sure. So I loved Ayana's reference to lead, and I'll just ping Inroads. So I was an Inroads intern for 4 summers in the Atlanta affiliate, so all the ATLians out there. And really that positioned my career and gave me access to corporate America. So unlike many interns, I actually had 3 sponsoring companies over 4 summers. So my first sponsoring company was Lend Lease Real Estate Investments. My second was Bank of America, and my last was GE. And that really positioned me kind of being at Georgetown, but being in these multiple corporate environments to get where I am today. So I studied finance, went directly into private equity, where, of course, not only the only person of color, but one of 2 or 3 women that were actually on the investment side of my private equity firm. And then over the years, kind of fell into human capital like many of us do, because I was at a company that had change of control. And I'm also a Korn Ferry alum, started doing executive recruiting and diversity at Korn Ferry, where I was for 6 years. And then got into L Brands, where I was focused on working at the executive level, recruiting, talent development, talent management, succession planning. And that got me to WeWork. So I took over executive recruiting, and then really in our efforts to go IPO, started looking at culture really intently, and ended up taking inclusion and diversity on global talent acquisition as well. The best part of my job is I always think about accountability. And as DEI professionals, we really are, in many cases, influencers of the outcome, but don't really kind of have that that accountability for the results when it comes to especially recruiting. So what's great about my job is I'm responsible for the DE&I strategy, but I'm also responsible for getting people into the company and retaining our top talent, regardless of if they're women, people of color, etc. So that's just a little bit of how I got into my current role.
I love it. Your role is quite comprehensive to ensure it stays intact. I love that. What about you, Trina? Please share with us more on your role at Rocket Companies and what it entails and how you ended up in this position.
Yes, I think I have to start back to, and I think Tamika said this too, the early in my journey, and LJ, you as well. I have a finance degree. I'm actually a certified fraud examiner. And so, so I started my career in healthcare, and really honing the skills of understanding business, complex business, functions and processes as an auditor. And then I got laid off twice in my career. And my parents both were at their respective organizations for 30 plus years. And so by not happenstance, but because I feel like everything happens for a reason. But my mentor at the time, Bridget Kennard, who was a member of the National Association of Black Accountants, in Bridget's way said, "Girl, get your suit on and bring as many resumes as you can." And I said, "Okay." And so we went to a conference, and it's the true story, the last company that I came across, which is now Merck. At the time, they were called Shearing Plow. Merck bought Shearing Plow. I met a woman who just started talking about her experience as an internal auditor, her experience both globally and, from a U.S. standpoint, and it intrigued me. And so, I found myself moving to New Jersey after growing up in Detroit. And going to school in Detroit. And it was a whole new world for me. I had a chance to work in 14 different countries, had a chance to live abroad, and it just expanded my scope of influence and also experiences. And so when I moved back to the States, because I lived in Puerto Rico for 2 years, helping to implement compliance requirements for the organization, I found myself at a crossroads of like, what was I going to do next? And so I ended up working for Ernst & Young. And I started in a very niche practice, fraud investigation and dispute services, say that 20 times. But it was a really small practice. There weren't many people who looked like me, especially when you think about life science, fraud investigation and dispute services, even more niche. And my goal was to be the first Black woman partner in Detroit for the firm. And at that point in my life, I had checked every box. I had checked the box of finishing college. I played basketball in college. I checked that box. I finished the box of, starting my career, moving on, and working globally. And then I checked the box of being married. And then I had a child. And my husband and I checked the box of being parents. And lo, did I know that a year and a half into her little life, that she was born with a really rare condition, and we almost lost her. And I'm so thankful that she is still here, but it changed my perception about my career. I stopped trying to be something that I didn't see, and I started to focus in on the things that I was passionate about. And I call it finding your jam. And so I was in search of my jam and what would get me up every day on those tough days. What would I do? So I essentially quit the firm. And it was a partner that put me aside, a white partner. And he said, Trina, I think you need to go and take some time and get your daughter well. And I'm glad I did. And she's 12 now, and I'm very thankful for that. But when I came back, I said, I still quit. And he was like, I really need your help in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I honestly answered him and I said, I don't know much about that other than I'm a Black woman. And that's about all I know in this space. And he was like, well, clearly we don't have it solved. I would argue that the firm has and still continues to have a center of excellence around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I rolled my sleeves up. I applied all the principles of being an investigator and an auditor and just curious and asking a lot of questions and really digging into processes. And we've talked about that a lot, but in order to have change, you have to eradicate where there are inequities in the process. And then you have to bring people along and hold them accountable in that. So getting that opportunity was phenomenal for me because it gave me a chance to marry the things that I love to do, help young people at the same time be able to make an impact that directly I could see. And so, that led me to leading corporate social responsibility, where I met Ebby in Yardstick Management on building out a program that I had the pleasure of helping to build out with Deborah K. Holmes, who recently passed away. And she taught me so much about what it was to be a leader. Again, a person that didn't look like me, but someone who was truly successful. And so, in between all of that, being on boards and meeting people and continuing to network, I met someone who worked for Dan Gilbert, who was the founder and chairman of Rocket Companies. And he kept telling me about what Dan was doing in the city of Detroit. And Dan made the decision to move from arguably the least diverse city in Michigan, Livonia, to the most diverse city, Detroit, 10 years ago, making this bold commitment of, you know what, we're going to help to support the change that is happening. And so I was seeing all these things externally, but I was trying to figure out really what it was all about. And so when this role came up, I had three questions that I asked, and I was just very curious. And I wasn't looking for a job. Fortunately, I've never had to look for a job except for that one time that I described. But I asked questions like, why now? Why do you want to have a role of diversity, equity, and inclusion 4 years ago? What does that mean to you as an organization? And it came back to this whole principle of what we call the isms. And there are 20 principles, simple things like do the right thing, we are the they. And how did those things play out? So it was very rooted in this deep, rich culture that Dan had created that it aligned and I could see myself there. But I also, I mean, data don't lie. Uh, when you start to unpack the data and you start to look at the data, you say to yourself, okay, we have some work to do. So I landed in this space, fortunately, because of the things that I had to reorient from a personal perspective, but also because I really was focusing on making an influence and an impact as opposed to trying to be something that I didn't see.
I love your story, Trina, and I'm seeing the chat. I mean, it's on fire right now. Everyone is loving your story. I think it's you've shared quite a lot, and finding that perspective, finding your jam, and it's really empowering and inspirational for our viewers here to hear that and kind of remain authentic to themselves and figuring out what they want to do. So thank you for sharing that with us. I've got quite a lot of questions, but our time is running. I want to ask you both to really speak to us about perhaps maybe the number one hurdle that you had to overcome on your growing path, whether it be through a company that you were working at or maybe just an individual level on a personal level that you had to overcome to push yourself forward into a leadership role. LJ, we can start with you.
Sure. And I think that this is the finance person in me, but wanting to check every box, right? So you see a new opportunity and it says, 10 to 15 years of experience. It says, led a team of over 20. It says this, that, and the other. And I don't know if it's, being a woman and saying, I want to make sure that I check every box before I put myself forward, before I promote myself, before I kind of go out on that limb. And that I think held me back in the early days. And essentially, when I kind of got to the table, it's people want people who are bright, smart, innovative, and you get around that table and you think you're trying to kind of size people up, and LinkedIn helps you a lot more. It's like, well, this person doesn't have 10 years of experience, and this person hasn't led a team this big, and this person hasn't lived abroad, but they have no problem promoting themselves and putting themselves forward. And it might be the Southerner in me too that wants people to speak for me and not kind of be out front. I'm terrible on social media for that, and I still get a little anxiety, but really overcoming that and owning that you perform, that you are bringing something to the conversation, and know that most other people aren't taking everything and checking every box before they put themselves out there. So put the boxes aside. Don't worry about the boxes. If it's something that you want to do and you feel like you have a chance at, go for it. Be a self-promoter.
I love that. Be a self-promoter. I love that. Trina, what about yours? What was that number one hurdle for you?
I'm going to go back to my EY days. I moved from client serving, which is revenue generation, to non-client serving, and sort of the back end office components. And that meant that, I had to take a step back, because either you are making money for the firm or you are you're draining it, right? Or you're an expense.
Right?
Let's say that. Yes. Thank you, LJ. And so that was a big, bold move for me. And I didn't realize what I was doing for myself. And I don't mean to sound braggadocious, but it was that small incremental back step that I took that I didn't know that would lead me to where I am today. And so again, I attribute that to people who I surrounded myself with of being honest with me and not sugarcoating things. I promise I will try not to use cuss words, but but, but I had people who were honest. I remember I interviewed 19 times when I was at the pharmaceutical manufacturing company for a sales role. And someone finally told me, you know what? You don't like rejection. And in sales, you you have to be able to overcome rejection. And I was like, wow, that was painful, but thank you. And so so I've learned to surround myself with people who are not just going to yes me and give me real honest advice. And so when I found myself at a crossroads of just trying to figure out what's next, or if I had the right tools to do it. I just went to those people who I knew would be honest with me and tell me the real, and then honed in on the things that I was really good at and not worry about the stuff that I wasn't. Like, I'm a strategist, I'm a visionary, but the tackling and blocking and, X's and O's, that's not my jam. So I surround myself with people who do that. I recognize where my strengths are, and I also recognize where my weaknesses are. And instead of dwelling on those weaknesses, I surround myself who can give me that strength to get through and power through those weaknesses. And so it goes back to the adage of NABA, the National Association of Black Accountants, lifting as you climb. And so as you're lifting, who helps to keep you climbing? And as you climb, who are you helped to lift? So that's how I look at overcoming barriers. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm a former athlete, and I'm sure that Abby would appreciate this. In the middle of a pandemic and racial uprising last year, and we're still in all of that, and we went public last year as well. So we had all these things that were happening as a company. Sometimes your confidence gets shook. And I remember reading this from Michael Jordan. He said, I believe every time out I was the best. And the more shots I hit, the more it reinforced that. So when you miss, because no matter how great you are, you will miss, you don't waver because you've built yourself a nice little cushion of confidence. So that's what I kind of hold on to when I find myself a little shook, or where I find myself like, I don't know. I hold on to, you know what? I've got this thing down. Now let me reevaluate where I am and how do I push forward. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. And I love your point on strengths too, identifying those strengths and weaknesses and amplifying the strengths, right? And holding on to that. I love that. Absolutely. We've got one more minute, but I want to make sure that we address also our decision makers in the room, and perhaps give them your words of wisdom and advice on how they can ensure that Black women have the space to grow and take on leadership roles in their companies. What advice would you have for them, LJ?
Well, I always say you can't manage what you don't measure, and knowing your numbers, right? So many people in a sea of sameness, the people who are unlike stand out. So there's this like complex that like we're not doing that bad, right? So what are your numbers? And when you look across your organization, if those numbers are really telling you a very different story than your perception, it's really kind of how do we kind of meet people where they are and make them feel included. So I always say, when I got to WeWork, I didn't ever think about not showing up as my authentic self, but it is clearly an environment that allows you to be you. And that goes a long way with the number of Black women. I wear my hair natural. I go to work comfortable, and look, it just really helps your psyche when you go in and people are there looking at you, accepting you for where you are. So if you do have those nuances in your culture that might be a gating issue where people don't feel like they are, putting on their work face, you're not going to be able to retain people over the long term. So I go back to culture. I know people had other answers to this question, but really kind of check your culture and see how people feel, and what can you do to open the aperture there so that that kind of culture fit doesn't mean that others are excluded.
Love that. I love that. Trina.
I'm going to be really quick, but LJ said it right. You have to start with the culture. The I is so important. Before you get to the E and the D, you must focus on inclusion, because you can bring in great talent, but that talent will leave you just as fast as you brought it in. So I'd say to organizations, and this is what we're working on, we're not perfect. We're not striving for perfection. We're striving for progress, and we're striving for performance, because that's why we exist as a company. We're here to perform and bottom line. And so thinking about what the culture looks like, not just how it plays out in surveys, but really digging deep and asking those questions that are important, extrapolating the data to not just look at it as an aggregate, but looking at it by different demographics. Look at the intersectionality of not just male and female, but women of color, and looking at other aspects, tenure, looking at age. Those components are super important, and if we all want to stay in business, it's imperative that we do it. Because I'll leave you with these statistics that organizations who are inclusive are 2 times more likely to exceed financial targets. I think all of us want to do that. 3 times more likely to be high performing. Yes, we do want to have high performing teams. 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. Well, of course, nobody wants to be the blockbusters of the world. And then 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. That is the reason why we're doing it. It's not the nice thing to do or the hot topic. If you want to stay in business or you want to stay relevant, then it behooves you to make this a business imperative. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective and my story. Thank you so much, Abby and the Yardstick management team.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trina. And thank you so much, LJ. This was
Thank
an
you.
awesome conversation. Really appreciated your perspective. Thank you both.